The courtroom smelled of stale coffee and old wood, but to Amos Jackson, it reeked of something worse: contempt. His gnarled hands gripped the edge of the defendant's table, knuckles whitening as the judge's laughter echoed, sharp and cruel, slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. At 72, Amos had seen plenty, but nothing prepared him for the sting of being mocked in a room meant for justice. It was a small-town courthouse in Georgia, 2025, where the air hung heavy with history. Amos, a black farmer with a stooped back and eyes that held decades of resilience, faced a charge of trespassing, a flimsy accusation from a white neighbor claiming Amos's foot crossed an invisible property line. The truth? That neighbor, Tom Hargrove, wanted Amos's land, a modest plot passed down through generations, now eyed for a developer's payday. The case should have been dismissed, but Judge Harlan Tate, a man with a reputation for favoring the right kind of folks, seemed to relish Amos's discomfort. "You expect me to believe you didn't know where your own land ends?" Tate sneered, leaning back in his chair, his round face flushed with amusement. "At your age, Mr. Jackson, you oughta know better." The gallery tittered, a mix of unease and sycophantic chuckles. Amos's lawyer, a young public defender named Clara Wells, stiffened beside him, her pen frozen over her notepad. She was out of her depth, fresh from law school, but her fire for justice burned bright. She shot Amos a look, silently urging him to stay calm. Amos didn't flinch. He'd faced worse: Jim Crow signs, night riders, the slow grind of a system that never saw him as equal. But this? This was personal. Hargrove sat smugly in the plaintiff's seat, his pressed suit a stark contrast to Amos's faded jacket. The man's smirk said he'd already won, and Tate's laughter only cemented it. "Your kind always has an excuse," the judge added, his voice dripping with condescension. Clara's pen snapped in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, voice trembling but firm, "this is a baseless claim. Mr. Jackson has documents proving his property line. Mr. Hargrove's accusation lacks evidence." She slid a folder across the table, her eyes daring Tate to look. He didn't. Instead, he waved a hand, dismissing her like a child. "I've seen enough of these disputes, Miss Wells. Folks like him," he nodded at Amos, "they get confused. Let's not waste time." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Amos's chest tightened, not from fear but from a rage he'd buried for years. He thought of his late wife, Ella, who'd tended their land with love, who'd whispered to him on her deathbed, "Hold it for Sarah." Sarah, their daughter, now a history professor in Atlanta, was his reason to fight. She didn't know he was here today. Amos hadn't wanted to worry her, but her strength was his anchor. Confused? Amos's voice cut through the room, low and steady, surprising even Clara. "I've worked that land 50 years. I know every inch. Hargrove's the one confused, thinkin' he can steal what's mine." The gallery went silent. Tate's smile faded, replaced by a scowl. "You watch your tone, old man," he snapped. "This court doesn't tolerate disrespect." "Disrespect?" Amos leaned forward, his eyes locking with Tate's. "You Logan at me, that's disrespect. You calling me a liar, that's disrespect. My family bled for that land, and you think it's a joke." The words hung heavy, raw with truth. A woman in the back row gasped. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably, his confidence cracking. Clara seized the moment. "Your Honor, I request a recess. We have new evidencia survey from 1965, signed by the county, confirming Mr. Jackson's boundaries." She held up a yellow document, her voice gaining strength. Tate's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the bench. He glanced at it, annoyed, then answered. "This better be important," he muttered. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. Tate's face paled as he listened, his eyes darting to Amos. The gallery sensed the shift, whispers rippling like wildfire. Clara frowned, leaning toward Amos. "What's happening?" she whispered. He shook his head, as confused as she was. Tate hung up, his hands trembling slightly. "Court's recessed," he barked, banging his gavel. 30 minutes. The room erupted in murmurs as Tate stormed to his chambers. Amos sat back, his heart pounding. Clara grabbed his arm. "That was no ordinary call," she said. "Something's changed." She was right. In that moment, neither knew that the call was from Sarah Jackson, who just learned of her father's trial from a friend in the courthouse. Sarah, with her sharp mind and fiercer heart, had spent years researching the town's history of land theft, and she'd uncovered a bombshell that could turn this case and Tate's career upside down. As the recess dragged on, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Hargrove paced, his lawyer whispering frantically. Clara pored over her notes, trying to piece together what was coming. Amos sat still, his mind drifting to the past, the night he and Ella planted their first garden, to the stories his grandfather told of surviving slavery on that very soil. This wasn't just about land, it was about legacy, about proving a black man's truth could stand against a system built to silence him. When Tate returned, his demeanor had shifted. The smugness was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped unease. "Miss Wells," he said, voice clipped, "present your evidence." Clara didn't hesitate. She laid out the 1965 survey, along with affidavits from neighbors who'd witnessed Hargrove's attempts to intimidate Amos. But the real blow came when she introduced a new document, handed to her during the recess by a courier. It was a title deed, unearthed by Sarah, showing Hargrove's family had illegally claimed adjacent land decades ago, land that overlapped Amos's property. "This proves Mr. Hargrove's claim is not only false but part of a pattern," Clara said, her voice ringing with conviction. "His family's history of fraudulent claims goes back generations, and this court has ignored it." The gallery exploded in gasps and whispers. Hargrove's face turned ashen. Tate gripped his gavel, his knuckles white. "Order," he shouted, but his authority felt hollow. Amos watched, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and disbelief. Sarah. She'd done this. She'd found the truth, not just for him but for every family cheated by men like Hargrove. The judge's eyes met Amos's, and for the first time, there was no laughter, only a flicker of fear. "Your Honor," Clara pressed, "we also have a witness. Dr. Sarah Jackson, the defendant's daughter, is prepared to testify about her research into local land disputes, including evidence of systemic bias in this court's rulings." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. Tate's face twitched. He knew Sarah's Nemeshed published papers exposing the town's ugly past, papers that had already stirred controversy. If she took the stand, the case would become a lightning rod. Tate cleared his throat. "I'll need to review this evidence," he said, his voice strained. "Court's adjourned until tomorrow." He banged the gavel and fled the bench, leaving chaos in his wake. Hargrove stormed out, his lawyer trailing. The gallery buzzed with speculation, some cheering Amos, others hurling slurs. Clara turned to Amos, her eyes shining. "We've got them on the ropes," she said. "Sarah's evidence's a game-changer." Amos nodded, his throat tight. He'd come to court expecting to lose, expecting the system to grind him down as it always had. But now there was hope. Not just for him, but for every person who'd been laughed at, dismissed, erased. He thought of Sarah, her voice on the phone, her fierce love carrying him through. Tomorrow, he'd fight again, not just for his land, but for the truth. As the courtroom emptied, Amos lingered, his fingers tracing the grain of the defendant's table. It felt like the oak of his porch swing, where he'd sat with Ella, dreaming of a better world for Sarah. That world wasn't here yet, but today, they'd cracked the foundation of the old one. And for Amos, that was enough to keep standing. The next morning, the courthouse was a powder keg. Word of Sarah Jackson's involvement had spread like wildfire, drawing a larger crowd, reporters, activists, and locals with their own grudges against the system. Amos felt the weight of their eyes as he shuffled to the defendant's table, his bad knee aching but his resolve ironclad. Clara, beside him, radiated nervous energy, her briefcase stuffed with documents Sarah had sent overnight. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Judge Tate entered, his face a mask of forced composure. Gone was the smug chuckle, his eyes darted to the packed gallery, where a mix of supporters and skeptics waited. Hargrove sat stiffly, his lawyer whispering furiously, no doubt rattled by the new evidence. Amos caught sight of Sarah slipping into the back row, her presence a quiet anchor. She wore a tailored blazer, her expression fierce yet composed, a scholar ready for battle. He hadn't seen her in months, but her nod gave him strength. Tate banged his gavel, silencing the room. "Miss Wells," he said, his voice tight, "you mentioned a witness. Proceed." Clara stood, her posture steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Your Honor, I call Dr. Sarah Jackson to the stand." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Sarah rose, her steps deliberate. Amos's heart swelled, his little girl, now a force, carrying their family's truth into the light. Sarah swore in, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm a professor of history at Emory University, specializing in Southern land disputes and systemic inequities," she began. "My research uncovered a pattern of fraudulent claims in this county, dating back to the 1920s, often targeting black families." She held up a thick binder, its pages tabbed and annotated. "This includes the Hargrove family's history of falsified deeds, one of which overlaps my father's property." The gallery stirred, some nodding, others glaring. Hargrove's face reddened, his fists clenching. Tate's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting Sarah continue. "I found court records from 1963, she said, where Mr. Hargrove's grandfather, using similar tactics, claimed land from a black farmer named Ezekiel Turner. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, yet the land was never returned. This court upheld that injustice." Her words landed like blows, each one precise. Amos saw a woman in the gallery wipe her eyes, her face mirroring his own pain. Clara stepped forward, holding the title deed from yesterday. "Dr. Jackson, can you confirm this document's relevance?" Sarah nodded. "It's a certified copy from the county archives, proving my father's land was legally deeded to our family in 1910. Hargrove's claim relies on a forged survey from 1972, which contradicts earlier records." She pointed to a map projected on a screen, highlighting the overlapping boundaries. The evidence was airtight, undeniable. Hargrove's lawyer leapt up. "Objection. This is speculative, Your Honor. Dr. Jackson's research isn't admissible without corroboration." Clara fired back, "The documents are public record, verified by the county clerk. We have affidavits from 3 historians supporting her findings." Tate's eyes narrowed, but he overruled the objection, his voice clipped. "Continue, Dr. Jackson." Sarah's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Amos. "This isn't just about my father," she said, her voice softening but no less fierce. "It's about every family who lost their land, their legacy, because the system turned a blind eye. Justice isn't just a word, it's a debt this town owes." The gallery erupted, some cheering, others shouting in protest. Tate banged his gavel repeatedly, his face flushed. "Order. I'll clear this courtroom," he roared, but the tension only grew. Amos watched Sarah, pride mixing with sorrow. She was fighting for him, for Ella, for their ancestors who'd clawed their way to freedom only to face new chains. But he also saw the cost, her shoulders tense, her eyes carrying the weight of a truth too long buried. He wanted to shield her, but this was her fight now, too. Clara called her next witness, an elderly black woman named Mabel Turner, Ezekiel's daughter. At 80, Mabel moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but her voice was steel. "My daddy lost everything," she said, glaring at Hargrove. "His land, his pride, because folks like you lied and this court let you." She pointed at Tate, her finger trembling but her aim true. "You Logan," at Amos. "You laughed at my daddy, too." The room fell silent, her words a haunting echo of decades of pain. Hargrove's lawyer tried to discredit Mabel, but his questions faltered under her unyielding gaze. "I got nothing left to lose," she said. "But I'll be damned if Amos loses his land, too." The gallery erupted again, and this time, Tate didn't try to stop it. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting with his gavel. Amos saw it then, the crack in the judge's armor. Sarah's call, her evidence, had shifted something fundamental. Clara closed her case with a final plea. "Your Honor, this isn't just about a property line. It's about righting a wrong, about acknowledging a history of theft and bias. Mr. Jackson's land is his, legally and morally. Dismiss this case and hold Mr. Hargrove accountable for his fraud." She sat, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on Tate. The judge leaned back, his silence stretching. The room held its breath. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I've reviewed the evidence. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed. The court finds no basis for the trespassing charge." A cheer went up, but Tate raised a hand. "However," he continued, "allegations of fraud require further investigation. I'm referring Mr. Hargrove's claims to the district attorney." Hargrove shot to his feet, his face twisted in fury. "This is outrageous. You can't." His lawyer yanked him down, whispering urgently. Amos exhaled, the weight of years lifting slightly. Sarah caught his eye, a small smile breaking through her intensity. Clara gripped his hand, tears in her eyes. "We did it, Amos," she whispered. But the victory wasn't clean. As the crowd spilled out, arguments erupted. Some praised the ruling, others called it a betrayal. Reporters swarmed Sarah, her calm voice cutting through the chaos as she spoke of justice and history. Amos lingered, watching the town divide itself, old wounds torn open. He knew this wasn't the end. Hargrove wouldn't stop, and the system, though shaken, was far from fixed. Outside, Sarah hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you I was coming," she said. "I couldn't let you face this alone." Amos cupped her face, his voice thick. "You made your mama proud today." They stood in the courthouse shadow, the Georgia sun warm but the air heavy with what lay ahead. That night, Amos sat on his porch, the swing creaking under him. The land stretched before him, alive with memories: Ella's laughter, Sarah's first steps, the sweat of his grandfather's labor. He'd kept it, for now. But Sarah's words echoed, a debt unpaid. The town would talk, argue, maybe even change. He hoped. The stars blinked above, and Amos felt Ella's presence, her strength in Sarah, in him. This land was more than dirt, it was proof of survival, of love that outlasted hate. He closed his eyes, at peace for the first time in years. What do you think? Where does justice lie in a town divided by truth? Share your thoughts on right, wrong, and the fight for fairness.